Very good. All right. Can you see the presentation on screen? Okay. I have long been fascinated with the history of Eureka and Humboldt County, particularly of Old Town Eureka and how it has changed through time. My talk is just the beginning of a project to document the buildings of Old Town Eureka through time since its founding in 1850. You know, Old Town, which was basically north of 4th Street, and later downtown Eureka were the heart of retail business for Eurekans until the Bayshore Mall's creation in the 1980s. And Old Town appears to be coming back, especially with some new buildings being built, old ones being renovated, and I'm especially happy with Dick Taylor Chocolate opening tonight in Old Town Eureka to celebrate the restoration of that building at First and E. Most of the historic photographs in the presentation today are from the Lloyd Stein collection at the Humboldt County Historical Society, so I want to thank them for sharing these photos. Lloyd Stein was a local amateur photographer who documented a lot of Eureka in Humboldt County during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So he was a great resource, and especially since he donated his full collection to the Historical Society, we now have that great resource. So here we go. Maybe, there we go. So number one, in the southeast corner, First and E in Eureka. This photo was taken in 1938 of the Revere Hotel. You can see in the photograph, the new photograph, that's a city parking lot now, next to the old art center or culture center building. So this building was in existence for a great deal of time through the late 1960s. And at this time in 1938 was, let's see, how can we do this? There we go. There was a barbershop in the corner. There was, of course, the hotel entrance up for the 2 second and third story hotel rooms, and then the Revere Varsity Club down at the end, which was a nightclub. Eureka was a happening place back in the 30s. And at any time, feel free to interrupt me. But I'm just going to go through these slides and talk a little bit about the buildings. Do you have any special anecdotes or stories? Please chime in. So the second photo is of 423 First Street, which is a remarkable survivor from the great early days of Eureka, reportedly built about 1869. It's currently the home of Whiplash Curve Jewelry and Globe Properties. Humboldt Cabinet Shop was the tenant in this 1947 photo. And you can see in the background, there's the building that Dick Taylor is going to be opening tonight. And as it looked in 1947 down the street. So some things have changed, some things have remained quite similar to those days. Now here's a building I don't know a whole lot about because it was torn down so long ago, but this is the only photo I've actually seen of it. 501 to 507 First Street. These are the last days of this building, shown in 1940 as it was torn down in 1941. And if you look the photograph, we'll enlarge it here. Maybe, there we go. It says the Waldorf on the side, but in the city directories from that time, there's no mention of the Waldorf. So it must be a holdover name from earlier years. In 1940, it was a liquor store owned by Jenny Ivansich, and upstairs were the Fay Apartments. But if you look in those windows upstairs, I don't see any window coverings, and it may have been already on its way out back then, even a year before demolition. And in the background, you can see one of the ever-present teepee burners that were everywhere in Humboldt County when I was a kid, burning all the scrap and waste from the local mills right behind that 1940 automobile. I think that's a Chevrolet, but I'm not sure. I find all this fascinating, just how things have changed so much in Old Town, yet some blocks, some buildings have remained remarkably intact. Now here's one that I really lament because this is a very early building, the one with my cursor on. I'll get to the one on the corner. It's just the old Western or Monte Carlo Hotel down here, but we have other photos of it. But this building here is another very early building in Eureka's history. It was built in 1869 as the American Exchange Hotel. And although a little decrepit, it survived well into the 1980s, but unfortunately was demolished in, I don't remember exactly when, the late 80s, early 90s, just before the Historic Preservation Ordinance was enacted in Eureka. I remember there was a little junk store in there, so I got into the bottom of that building. You can see the sign sticking out in front right there. It says American Exchange Hotel. There were lots and lots of little and medium-sized hotels in downtown and Old Town Eureka. This, you know, you got off the boat and needed a place to stay, and there were lots of places to choose from. You can see there's a new building at that site now, and a parking lot down where the Western Hotel was. Now this is an interesting juxtaposition. It was the Fjord Italia Hotel, and you can see the building still exists. You can see from the front facade and those arched entrances, and then this little depression or indentation in the building. Oops, back. But it's short. Where did those two top stories go? There's a story in the historian at some point, I don't remember exactly what year, about that. I don't believe it was fire. I just think they took off the top two stories because it was either costing them too much or they didn't need them. There's an interesting story to be looked at in the future, how this building survived, yet the upper two stories disappeared. And it's, you know, still lodging of a sort as the rescue mission. So it's basically the same usage. Now, this building tells the story of change in Eureka for sure. Before 1946, when this building was built, there was a big two-story building here with a mezzanine inside, and it was one of the Booner stores. This was more of a, there was a hardware store in the Ingomar Carson Block building, but there was also a store here. But in 1946, after that building disappeared, Frank Breeden built his building for Northern Marine Hardware. And I don't know if you can see in the picture, but oops, I keep going back. The building was just on the corner, and between the Healy building, the big brick building here, and the Breeden building, there was nothing, but that was filled in with a similar style building recently, more recently. And until earlier this year, it looked pretty much like this. It was owned by the family since it was built, and Frank Breeden's grandson had his accountancy business there, and he sold the building just last year, and it was demolished, and a new building, as you can see in the current photo, is going up. So it's a mixed-use multi-story building. I think it's going to be 3 stories, similar in size to the Healy building, but Eureka changes, Eureka stays the same. Eureka's buildings come and go, but hopefully it's coming back to be the center of our town. Now here is a little known gem of early Eureka. This is the only photo I've ever seen of it. It was originally the Humboldt County Jail. It was put through many different uses after the jail moved to a new building around the turn of the century, the 20th century. In this photo in 1937, it was used for housing the State Board of Equalization, the county surveyor's office. My supposition is, because the building was torn down in 1955, is that it suffered quite a bit of damage due to the big 1954 earthquake we had that caused a lot of buildings to be taken down in Eureka and Humboldt County as an unreinforced masonry building. So this is basically the corner of 2nd and K. You can see there are some county buildings there now, kind of undistinguished, but I love that little brick building. Just, it's so unique to Eureka and Humboldt County. I've seen nothing else like it. Well, this is a building that a lot of people remember because it hasn't been gone all that long. I don't remember what year the Florida Bakery was. Yeah. I have to learn my own program here. There we go. So this is Fleurs Bakery, the original building, and behind it is was a 50s add-on. And this is a Eureka ice and cold storage building over here. You can see the cooling tower on top. It was not built for that. This was built as a creamery building, but this is how it looked in the 40s and up until the early 2000s when the Co-op building purchased this property. Fluors left and they tore down this building, but the 1950s building on the corner of 4th and A was actually incorporated. You can't really see it here because the facade's all been added, but this part of the Co-op building is actually part of the original Fluors Bakery building. I distinctly remember how wonderful Old Town downtown used to smell, that lovely yeasty bready smell when Fluors was proofing bread. I just loved driving by there. Now here's a cute little building that I don't think many people know about. This is at the corner of 3rd and C Streets. At this point, it was a beer hall owned by Peter Cattarelli. It was demolished early 1954. So it's been gone for a while, but you can see from the little, this looks like a settlement era property here. This is quite old, but the shingle roof's kind of given way here. But this apartment building here is currently undergoing renovations after decades and decades of neglect. So some buildings are gone, some buildings are coming back that easily could have been demolished or torn down at some point in time. I love all the old cars too. There's a 41 Ford in the foreground, and I don't know what that is. It looks like a late 30s GM product. Now here's a very familiar site for most people that go to Old Town, downtown Eureka. This is the old Bank of Eureka, now the Clark Museum. But they don't, a lot of people don't remember the Liberty Theater. It used to be adjacent to the Clark Museum. It was owned by the Redwood Theater chain, which of course owned the Arcada, the Minor, the Eureka Theater, the Fortuna Theater, and a bunch of other theaters up and down the coast. It was kind of a second run theater, and a lot of kids movies were shown there. And in the 50s, they stopped using it, and Richard Mann, the owner of Redwood Theaters, tore it down. It was an empty lot. But in the late 70s, when the Clark Museum was looking to expand so they could house their Native American collection, Richard Mann donated its property very generously, and the city of Eureka partnered with the Clark Museum to build the current Neelis Hall, which you can kind of see here in the background, which it's been ever since. So we're grateful for that. This wonderful building down the street was originally Craddock's Business College and later called Eureka Business College. My aunt, who was born in 1911, went here in the 30s and learned her business basics, and they must have done a good job. She had the most beautiful handwriting I've ever seen, and that was a skill that was taught then, not so much now. And this is a great success story as far as Old Town preservation, because Bob Imperial bought this building in the 70s and renovated it, and otherwise it could have gone the way of some of the other buildings, but it's been used by a variety of businesses and tenants upstairs for years now. So 40 years, some 40 years. So there are some great success stories with preservation in Old Town Eureka. Not so much this one, but it's an interesting building, which I'll go into more depth when we get to another slide. Current building you see on the right, it was built in 1950. It's called the Beret Building. It was built for a very well-known local doctor, Samuel P. Beret. And Mazzotti's was there for years, and a lot of other businesses over the years. But this is the building that was built in 1884 on the same corner and was there for years until mid-1949 when it was torn down. And one of our greatest success stories is the wonderful Carson Block Ingomar Theater building, built in 1891-92 for William Carson, with retail on the ground floor, offices on the second and third floors, surrounding the wonderful Ingomar Theater in the interior, second and third floors. This building was restored to its 1918 look by a variety of contractors and planners and architects for NCIDC just a few years ago. And even though in 1949, when the first photo was taken, you can see the corner tower was there, that was later taken off and a great big sign was put up when the furniture store went in, the old Ingomar Theater building. So they went to a great deal of trouble and money to restore this building to its original look, or its 1918 look, even to the point of restoring this tower and putting in the curved glass windows that were locally made. And then you can see here that the side had glass brick, probably put in the 30s, 20s or 30s. So the original storefronts have been restored, the patterned brick has been restored to these areas and the original configuration of windows. I think this is probably one of our greatest success stories of preservation of a wonderful Newsom Brothers designed building, or Samuel Newsom anyway, the same architect who partnered with his brother to design the Carson Mansion at the end of the 2nd Street. Now here's an interesting compilation or conglomeration of buildings on the southwest corner of 3rd and F. So this building still looks pretty much the same. It was the Busy Bee Cafe at the time and the Bank of America over here. But these buildings, even though they are still there, including 10 Window Williams down the corner, but everything from 10 Window Williams around to the alley on F Street. I think there are 4 separate buildings there. And they're all still there under the modern veneer, although a lot of the ornamentation bays have been sheared off. So this building is this building. This building is the one with the bays. And this building is something that Jack Freeman really heavily modified recently when he renovated. And then the Lambert McKeon print shop down here. So very much an example of how old buildings changed through time to the point of being almost unrecognizable, but yet they're still there. Here's another building on the northwest corner of 3rd and F Streets that is very familiar to most of us. It's been carefully renovated and kept up by owner Charles Louvier, and has the Madrone Pizza in the back and some other businesses in front, although the Ritz Bar is currently not tenanted. But it's a great example of streamlined modern architecture similar to the Eureka Theater. But this is what it looked like before that, which is basically the same shape without the bays. So it is actually, the bones of the building are this Victorian building. It was just heavily remodeled in 1946 and lives on to this day in that configuration. You can see in the background the Clark Museum on the corner, so you can get your bearings. All right, so I told you we'd return to the southeast corner of 3rd and F. This is the building that Sam Beret had built in 1950. But before that, this wonderful 1884 building housed the Weck, later Fitzel, and later Bowmans Pharmacy. And this is an interior photo of that pharmacy in its heyday. What a beautiful, elaborate Victorian interior. And believe it or not, a good deal of this survives in various hands, because even after the building was torn down in 1949, the cabinets were all kept and saved, and they went to the Neale, N-E-A-L-E pharmacy, which took over the last pharmacy at this site, the Bowmans Pharmacy, and it moved up to a fairly nondescript building on the corner of 5th and F. And then when that pharmacy closed, all these displays were parted out. So these back cabinets still exist. If you walk into the Clark Museum, they're right in front of you. And then if you go into the Historical Society, there's some more of them to the right when you go in, and all the books that the Society has for sale are displayed in these cabinets. I even have one of these low cabinets that's in front here that I salvaged from a junk shop years ago. that had the low display cases on them, and I know of 2 others. So that's architectural salvage for you. People find something of merit in old buildings even when they're torn down, and things tend to survive if they have something interesting about them and are repurposed and reused. So I can see even all the pharmacy bottles on the shelves here, which the Clark has a great deal of. So a lot of this survived, which is a good thing, I think. And those of you who like the architecture of the 50s, this is an interesting building too. It's kind of a streamlined modern holdover from the 40s, but it has its own strength with the ribbon windows in front and the glass storefronts. So I think it has merit now too, after being in that location for 70 plus years. Oh, this is one of my all-time favorite buildings in its original configuration. Although you wouldn't know it today, this building was built in 1886. Avalon Restaurant was there for years, and Tail Waggers is there now, and there's a Taste of Bim in the back restaurant. But this facade, just, I don't know why it speaks to me, but I just love the detailing. You can see up in the pediment up here, 1886, the Lindsay Building, with these paired arched windows and then the single arched windows down the side. This double door here is the staircase that goes to the upstairs apartment. And I poked my head in there one time, and actually the upstairs is still a bit Victorian with some plaster medallions and some of the millwork and everything. So it's another building that you wouldn't know is a Victorian, but is survived in a modified form to this date. Look at this cute little building over here. This is the parking lot for the Art Center building, and here's the Booner or Art Center building over here, the 3-story brick building on the corner of 2nd and G. So get your bearings. And looks like there was an attorney at law upstairs, and wasn't all residential housing, and the state of California's Department of Employment. In fact, I remember talking to Vernon Smith, who was a good friend of my wife's mother, and he taught at various schools, Arcata High and College of the Redwoods, but he was one of the founding members of the Historical Society in 1947. He was a young teacher and was a student of Hyman Palais, one of the first presidents of the Humboldt County Historical Society. But he told me when he first came to Eureka, this is where he went to look for work, was the State of California Department of Employment on corner of 3rd and G. This one's special to me because my wife and I started our antique business in the corner of the Russ Market building on the northwest corner of 3rd and G in the 90s, and had the corner spot where the sign's sticking out here. Unfortunately, Bev Wolf from Avalon Restaurant across the street had, because we had moved our antique shop next door to this building, the Russ building they call it, which was the Humboldt Club upstairs, but she had opened a gourmet cheese shop in the corner, and that had not actually opened to the public when the fire started in December of 2006. And because this was always a market and cold storage, because there was a meat market back here, the floors and the walls were filled with sawdust for insulation. So once the fire got started and got into those chases where the sawdust was, there was no stopping it. That was one of the hottest fires I've ever seen. And the fire department heroically, although they couldn't save this building, saved the neighboring buildings from burning down. We were in this storefront down here, and we stood there and watched as the water that they pumped into the building came out the front doors with a good part of our inventory floating out the door and down the street. And the water actually inundated the basement of the Carson Block Ingomar Theater building, which came dangerously close to shorting out Old Town because there is an old PG&E substation in the basement of the Ingomar Theater building, which you wouldn't know, but we dodged that bullet. One last thing about the Russ building, built in 1879, wasn't always stuccoed. It had wooden siding on it one time and had some different windows. You can see these arched top windows. They're originally here too. Somehow the upper part of the windows arch stayed intact, but the rest of it didn't. But these wonderful window doors here, these actually pushed up, and basically the Russ market and later the meat market that was there became an open air market that you could access through any of the doors. I think there were a few more that went down G Street, and it was like an open air market. You walk in and out and look at the wares. I know Maxons, who had owned this building for years, have some wonderful photographs of this building when it was a Victorian, in its Victorian prime, and some artifacts that were rescued before the fire. But as you can see from the 2022 photo, the lot remains empty. This is a concrete foundation where the big safe used to sit that we could get into from the Russ market where they stored everything at night. Now this is a very interesting photograph because it shows just how eclectic Eureka was and how many interesting buildings were located in various locations between the bigger and more well-known buildings. This is the old James G. Ryan dwelling. So this is the one right here in the middle. One of the very earliest dwellings built in 1855, but not at this location. It was built at 2nd and E Streets, and it was later moved to 110 D Street and was known as the Colonel Duff property. Torn down August of 1938. This is a picture taken just the year before that. And as you can see, its location is now where a very recent building, the last 25 years, is housing Ells and Evans accountants. So that's kind of what I remember Old Town looking like, just kind of a hodgepodge of old buildings, which I loved. I loved how different it was and how unique it was and how many different styles there were. Now here's a building that still stands, the 2nd C. At that time, it was called Armory Hall in the 40s. And I think it had been a hall. And I don't know the story behind the back of this building and why it's being taken off. But the back part of the building, which as you can see, was a big open hall. And maybe they were remodeling into apartments, but it's a mystery to me, and I haven't found that story yet.
Hey, Chuck.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because I also did some research, and this is still a Stein photo.
This is a Stein photo.
Because I'd never seen a view of that, and I also came across all sorts of little newspaper accounts of it being an Armory Hall, and I kept thinking about New York's Armory. And then I heard a little squib in the newspaper about soldier, or something about some mustering going on at the Armory building, or soldiers being directed there. And I thought, was this an actual site? And now it looks like it might have been an armory, a real, with,
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if there was damage to the building when it was the Armory, and that's why they're doing the changes, or they're just changing it from the Armory Hall into, apartments or something.
Right. And there's another couple of Stein photos from the other side of it, and it shows the remodeling on the other side of it. Yeah, exactly. That window,
well,
or
that
the balcony.
Not only is the balcony turned into a square bay, but the square bay is also much narrower than the balcony. I mean, you would think from the photographs taken in 2022, with the ornamentation on the top of that square bay, that's how it always looked. Maybe the windows were different, but
right.
But no, it was like twice as wide.
Right. And
had this wonderful colonnaded balcony. So.
Yeah, I wondered about that too. I saw the same thing and thought, what the heck went on there?
Well, that was when it was Armory Hall. So.
Yeah. Whatever was going on there, I couldn't find out. But yeah.
There's another research project for another day to find out what's going on.
Yeah, thank you.
Armory Hall prior to 1947. And I just as an aside here, because when the Eagle House building was restored in the 80s, we happened to be standing in this upper bay as the ceremonial topper was put on. They had a crane out in front and it lifted that copper dome onto the top of the corner bay to replace, what had originally been a copper dome there. But at that time, and I don't know if you ever really noticed how different the fourth story is of the Eagle House. That wasn't there. That was added in the 90s for more rooms for the hotel or bed and breakfast that was in there at the time. So not a bad thing, but it looks a little incongruous compared to the architecture of the rest of the building. And now we have the new restaurant going in on the ground floor that replaced Gallagher. So old buildings find new lives, even though they're the same, type of usage. Things keep changing. Here's another one that I lament. Not all demolitions are necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes buildings need to go for various reasons. Maybe they're structurally undersound, but there's one that is such a monumental building and it was such a beautiful, beautiful building inside too. I know I have a photograph somewhere of the entrance hall of this building. It had a big circular staircase and that went all the way from the basement to the second floor, and that cupola on top that you can see throughout town. The city hall was built to replace an earlier city hall. This one was built in 1904 and was demolished around 1960 because of the big 1954 earthquake did a lot of damage to this building, being another unreinforced masonry building. I know I've seen pictures taken after the earthquake, but before the demolition, and there are big braces all along the alley side holding up the wall so it won't collapse on people. But they continued using this building as City Hall through the late 50s until the current City Hall was built. And actually, this was a combination of City Hall and the main fire department, because you can't see it in this photo, but to the, well, I guess the opposite corner, the back corner on the alley, there's actually a tower that was a hose drying tower, because the basement, and see these doors down here, let's enlarge this actually, these doors down here were the city fire department's main location. So the fire trucks for the downtown, Old Town area came out of these doors when there was ever an event that required their attendance. Now, you notice at the front entrance, there are these two half-round pieces of granite that mark the stairs, the entrance stairs. And for years after the building was torn down, they sat out at Johnson's Trailer Sales out in Myrtletown. And I always wondered what they were. And then when Johnson sold, he donated them to the Heritage Society. And we, along with the city, did a little memorial on the corner here. So the original cornerstone of the City Hall building is in this plinth here. And these half-round pieces of granite that came off the front of the building are here on the corner of the parking lot where City Hall used to stand to commemorate that lovely building. Now, I remember this building very well at the foot of S Street, where Bayfront 1 is now located, because when I was a little kid, and you can see in the corner down here that there is a little newsstand, but this is where the ferries came in. And this is, if you want to go to Samoa, this is where you caught the ferry. This is the Cogtaw Launch building. And it was looking a little decrepit even then in 1948. And by the time I saw it in the 60s and early 70s, it was looking a little worse than that. So this is one building maybe that I could see that it was logical to get rid of it, because it would, when the launches were no longer used after 1972, when the Samoa Bridge was built, the building kind of lost its purpose. It was demolished long before Bayfront 1 was built, so it was an empty lot for a long time. And then the big warehouses on the waterfront were there for ages too, and they were taken down in the 80s. There were, when I was a little kid in the 60s, there was so much activity on the waterfront because the fishing industry was in full swing. And of course, the lumber and timber industry too. But I remember distinctly going with my stepdad up this ramp and around. There was a platform around the whole building, and you could watch as the boats unloaded and the seafood was processed. And it was a pretty thriving seaport at the time, and things were happening. Even though when I was a kid, you didn't go to Old Town by yourself, because it was a pretty rough place. There were bars on every corner. And I remember when my great uncle was going to go back to Finland where he was born and raised, but hadn't been back for 60 years. He went out one night to celebrate, and we didn't see him for 3 days after that because he hit every bar in Old Town, I think. Pardon me 1 second while I put my screaming cat away so it doesn't interrupt the program.
And just a reminder, if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat window and we'll make sure that they get addressed.
What'd you say, Corinne?
Oh, just reminding everybody that if any questions or anything, they can put them in the chat window.
Okay, all right, please do. Hopefully somebody else finds this as fascinating as I do, but I've been fascinated by Old Town since I was a little kid when it was kind of a scary place to go, but fun at the same time. So this building, which at that time had the Fox's Den bar and the popular hotel above on the second floor, was at the northeast corner of First and E, right in front of what is now housing Health Sport. So, and was Globe Imports for years. So I don't know exactly when this building came down, but it was quite a long time ago. This building back here, which is a feed store at the time, is the building that still stands and is used as Health Sport. And then this building over here is the one we looked at earlier, which has Whiplash Curve and Maxim, their Globe properties, built in 1869. So this building seems to be about turn of the century, maybe late 1890s, early 1900s. But that was typical of buildings built in Eureka at the time. And as we talked about, bars on every corner. Now this building, I really, really miss. There were so many good stories about. This was the Western Hotel originally, but in my parents' memory, it was the Monte Carlo Hotel. And the Monte Carlo Cafe and bar was legendary. I still have some old cocktail napkins from the Monte Carlo Glow Room. That's where you went to get your glow on. So there you can see the sign that says GLO Room, Glow Room. And that was a very popular destination for years and years and years. This building was around for, I think around 1972, it came down. And it was in pretty good shape. I just didn't have any more use for it. It was like a lot of buildings, you know, a lot of the upper floors were no longer tenanted or they didn't have any use for. So why pay for the upkeep on such a big building when you're only using part of it? Because I remember, I have a photo somewhere of this taken just before it was demolished and it was still in pretty good shape. But that doesn't mean it's got a use. So as you can see today, it's another city parking lot. As cars took over our world, we needed more places for them. Here's another building that still exists, although you wouldn't quite, I mean, you look at the building today and it has a little ornamentation on it, but none of that is original. That building was all resited back in the 80s and doesn't really look like what it used to look like. So this was Sawtell's building, I believe, Sawtell, and was various things over the years, but most people knew it as Jimmy Dunn's. And in this photo, which let's see, was taken in 1948, doesn't say Jim Dunn or Jimmy Dunn's, but if you look at the sign over here under the Coca-Cola sign, it says it's Cosmopolitan, run by Jim Dunn, with rooms to let upstairs. So it's another Victorian building that's been somewhat changed, but still exists with the Green Lily restaurant down here in this part. Now the buildings between Jim Dunn's or the Sawtell building and the Healy building down here are gone. The Romano Gabriel Gardens are recessed in this area, but this Workman's Hotel, this 4-story hotel in the middle, is where my grandfather stayed when he first came to Eureka from Finland in about 1908. I found something in some of my mom's stuff that showed that was the address he had. when he first came to town. So that's probably the case with a lot of people who came here to work in the woods. They had, especially the single men, when they weren't working, they had to have a place to stay in town. And this is one of them. Well, I don't know what I just did, but we'll go back to my slides. And all right, northeast corner of 2nd and G. So this is across the side street G from the Bowmans Hotel and across G Street from the Art Center or Booner Building. So this block, or half block at least, had a wide variety of buildings, none of which took up that much space, but until the late 1950s, there was a wide variety of stuff going on here. Furniture stores, real estate agents, insurance agents, newsstands, just a great number of different tenants. Look at the middle here, you can see it's Johnson's Bookstore, and it's W.A. Hepler Insurance. I don't know, there was such a variety of things going on. I can't quite read what it says in this false front here, but there's some old signage on the false front that said what used to be there. But once again, like a lot of Old Town, these buildings were getting fairly decrepit by the late 50s. So they were all torn down for the building. It's currently on the site. And here's another set of buildings right across from the Clark Museum on the northeast corner of 3rd and E, which were very handsome. So I believe the Splendid Cafe in the center, as I remember the story, was a Greek, or at least was run by a Greek family. I think it was Jerry Kalivas's dad that ran that, and he was principal at my junior high school. So he went a different way. These three buildings anchored that corner. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then the alley. So the building down here where Ramon's Coffee and Chocolates is still there, and the corner building where Booklager Books is. But these buildings, unfortunately, all caught on fire in 1958. That's another archive that we really need to get into and publicize more often. The City of Eureka's fire department on the 2nd floor in their building, in a closet, which is not very well known and it's not very well cataloged, has a wonderful collection of photographs of fires in Eureka going back to the earliest days. And there's a great photo of this building on fire with a hook and ladder truck spraying water onto it. Unfortunately, they couldn't save it, but boy, they sure tried. And then there's the Tim Winda Williams building here on the opposite corner, which is still there. And of course, anyone who was here before 1940 remembers the streetcar tracks that went down E Street. That was, if you didn't have a car and didn't want to hoof it, that was the major way to get around town. And another corner that didn't survive is the corner in Old Town at 2nd and F, where the gazebo is now. So you can see the C.W. Long building here, where Restoration Hardware was for years, is here in this 1938 photo. So this is that same corner with a bunch of different uses for the building. There's a tavern at the corner, and C.W. Long building, and of course the 1877 brick buildings down at the corner of 2nd E, that where Los Bagels are now. So that's the scene. These are also 1880s to early 1890s buildings that survived into the 1950s. This lot was vacant for quite a few years until the gazebo was built in 1973. So there you go. Look at the ornamentation on this building, the floriate frieze here and the gable ends. And it may be a box of a building, but the basic building is so enhanced by the ornamentation. As you can tell, I'm a Victorian fan. This is what happened to a lot of Old Town in the 50s. So you can see in this building, in this picture rather, that this building, which housed Roy's Club restaurant for years, which is still there and quite in good shape, is also shown in the old photo in 1946. And it's called Roy's Club, of course. But Albee and Buck, which is just around the corner still, had their supply company there. And that actually is not that old of a building in 1955 when it was torn down. It's probably 30 years old at the most. The city just decided, because cars were making such an inroad into American life and everyone had one, and they went downtown to shop and didn't have any place to park. So they cleared this quarter block in 1955 specifically for a parking lot and a few others in Eureka. Not that there's anything wrong with the buildings, they just needed parking. Now this building is amazing to me. You wouldn't even know it was ever there. So this is Second and A, and it was called the Occidental Pavilion. And there's a scene on the front of the building in this big oval. It was torn down after a big windstorm in May of 1941. My mother, who was born in 1925, remembered this building very fondly for going there for many events when she was a child and into her teens. It was a huge hall and a lot of things happened there from turn of the century until the 40s. So across the street, by this time it wasn't there, but across the street where looks like just a grass lot was the Occidental Mill. That's where the Occidental Pavilion got its name. So First Street actually didn't go through in those days because the mill took up that whole space between the waterfront and Second Street, all the way up to where the Occidental Pavilion is now. And down here on Second is where living style furniture and those buildings are today. I love the asymmetrical use of the towers too, because here's a little tower, here's a taller little tower and a big tower, but nothing on the right. So it kind of looks a little lopsided, but I love this building. And I think after the building was demolished, at some point, there was a truck terminal here for a long while, maybe from the 50s until the 80s. And it was a raised platform and just placed to load and unload trucks, but it's been vacant ever since. So here's something that's ripe for development in Old Town. Hopefully we get some sensitive development to take that empty spot with all the pampas grass. Now here's a corner that everyone knows. It's right across from the Waterfront Cafe on the southeast corner of First and F, called the Fairwind Bar. And I'll enlarge it so you can see it better, but I'll try to enlarge it. As you can see, the top of the roof is burnt off. This is 1941 and it had a fire. It had to be torn down, but the Snug building is still with us to this day. It's such a cute little building with a hair salon and a few other businesses in there. But amazingly, even though the building was torn down, the same person I talked about earlier, Vernon Smith, the CR history teacher, who I knew in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s quite well, he had this entire front entrance and all the millwork and doors and everything. So even though it had suffered the fire and was torn down, even in the 40s, they thought to salvage the good parts and save them for other uses. And he put them to use as garden ornamentation, but you know, they were used for something. Now, this is the only picture I've seen of this building. Way down on the First and G Street corner, just down from the Vance Hotel. I know only what was in the city directories. So as you can see, it needs to be painted. This is 1941. According to the city directories in that time period, it was home of the Humboldt Stevedore Company, the Redwood Export Company, and the Humboldt Redwood Reforestation Association. And their addresses were all given as 107 G Street. And this address disappears out of the city directories by the late 40s. So I imagine the building came down about that time. Not really distinguished architecturally, but certainly unusual with those second story corner bays on the two corners. I find it fascinating to know more about the Humboldt Redwood Reforestation Association. We think about all those good forestry practices happening more recently, but evidently they were thinking about reforestation even way back then. Well, we're closing in on the end of the talk now. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much, but here's another example of progress in Eureka. This corner, which you don't see very many photos of, behind what is lost, or the brewery. So here's Lost Coast Brewery, and you can see the tower because it was the Pythian Castle upstairs at the time. But this is the city parking lot that spans the block from G to H. And on the corner, I think you can see it here. And I've heard stories about this place. And is it part of what is now Marcelli's? Because this was a sausage and ravioli factory, and it was run by Marcelli Attilio. So I don't know if that's any relation to the current Marcelli's, but interesting that a lot of Italians were making raviolis. Another interesting thing to me anyway, is that you can see down here, this two-story building was where Signsmith was. He was a local sign painter that was here from the 20s until the 90s, lived to be almost 100 years old. But when this whole block was torn down in 1955, he picked up his whole sign business from this address on 3rd Street and moved it to exactly the same address on 2nd Street. And it was there until the 90s. And I went through the building with Ray Hillman, but it was almost a twin to that building. Now back to Roy's Club area. So here's Roy's Club on the right. The original building on the left. Part of this is the original building, but this, with all the windows, is from a remodel. And then this was added for the deli, which Royce was famous for in later years. But prior to that, it was empty space since 1941. So these two little buildings were on that corner and were demolished in 1941. But you go back through the city directories for the late 30s, and they're all listed as vacant. So they must have been unused for quite a long time. Not unused, though, was the building on the corner of 2nd and C, which was the Grand. And I think it lives up to its reputation as the Grand Hotel. In its later years, it was called the Sterling Hotel and was torn down in 1948. But in one of the albums that Lloyd Stein has, and he doesn't have very many interior photos, mostly all street scenes, but he got into this building and took some wonderful photos down the halls, and there was a big central open space and balconies around it. So you could look down from the room, you went out your room and onto the balcony, interior balconies, and it was quite an elegant building. One that would be nice to have, because the building that replaced it was a truck terminal. It was, I'm sure, utilitarian, but not very interesting. And to end our program today, I wanted to talk about a little building on the foot of Commercial Street, which hasn't changed much at all since it was built in 1948. And I hope you take a chance, when you get a chance, to go there and have a meal. La Vista Del Mar, it's a wonderful place. Food is great. Still looks like it did in 1948, although the surroundings don't. You can see the train was in use. The tracks are nice and shiny. And I think that building over there says Southern Lines, where the fishery is now. So I hope you enjoyed my little spiel. I hope to do more on this in the future because I want to go back to the archives from our various local historical society, Clark Museum, etc., and document what's been on most of these sites since construction on buildings started here in the 1850s. So may never get done, but it's certainly something I'm interested in and would love to do. So this is just a snippet of what's gone on in Old Town Eureka at select locations from the 1930s to now. So any questions, any comments, any anecdotes?
As we wait to see if anybody has any questions, there was one comment of seeing the old ferry launch building at the foot of F. The current Bayfront one doesn't seem totally out of place.
No, not at all. No.
Kind of kept the same style almost. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat while we wait. Just in terms of library updates, all of our branches are now open to pre-COVID hours. So we're open late. Here in Eureka, we're open late on Wednesday, open early on Fridays. We've got some book clubs that are meeting in person now, and we've got more programs that we are adding on. So if you haven't been to the library lately, I would recommend stopping in. We've got a lot of great stuff going on. Also, the Humboldt room, which is our historical archive room in the main branch in Eureka, is now open on Fridays and Saturdays. So previously you had to make an appointment to use it, and now it's just open for drop-in on Fridays and Saturdays. So if you want to do some research like Chuck has done and you're inspired by him, I would recommend stopping by the library. Let's see. And yeah, lectures in person, we're discussing that. We're still kind of a little wary with all the different COVIDs and things that are going around. So we're just being extra cautious, but it is in discussion as to when we're going to have in-person lectures again.
You're thinking maybe the spring? Maybe the spring?
Maybe the spring. Yeah, I think we're going to kind of write out the flu season and see what happens in spring. Everyone keep your fingers crossed that, things are mellow and we can get back to meeting in person. And it looks like we don't have any questions. So with that, I will go ahead and let everybody go. Thank you, Chuck, for your lecture and all the great research. It was fantastic.
It was.
And,
thank you, Chuck.
This recording will go up on the Humboldt County Library YouTube on Tuesday. So if you want to revisit this or share it with somebody, you can always find it there. You also have my email, so you're more than welcome to email me if you can't find it or have any questions. And yeah, with that, we'll send you off. Everybody, I hope you have happy holidays, happy new year, and we will see you in 2023.
See you at Dick Taylor tonight.
Yeah, and probably see a lot of people at the new Dick Taylor building tonight. So if you're going to Arts Alive, stay warm. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.